Hi everyone, I'm Daniel Victor, and in this video I'll be dissecting the motion that came up in semi-finals of RI's Inter-School Debating Championship. So the motion for this round reads, "This House regrets the rise of fitness influencers." So in this video, I'll be going through the sort of possible arguments that you can make both side proposition and opposition. So let's just dive into side proposition first. So when it comes to side proposition, there's a few important things that you have to keep in mind when it comes to setup. Firstly, keep in mind that this motion is not about whether fitness influencers are a good or a bad thing. It's about whether this specific rise or this increased quantity of fitness influencers coming about is a good or a bad thing. And the second thing you have to keep in mind is you sort of have to give a few pieces of characterization as to how these fitness influencers actually look like. One thing you can talk about is that these fitness influencers usually have a large digital presence. That is to say, they use social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube to post videos, or even have live sessions with their followers about fitness related content. And secondly, you can also sort of say that the content that they usually put out is, in most instances, one thing. It looks like exercise routines, it looks like diet plans. In certain cases, it even looks like product reviews for fitness related supplements or fitness related gear and things of that sort. And something else that you could also make clear during setup a side proposition is that you could say that in a world where this specific rise of fitness influencers does not exist, the counterfactual would look like one where there is only a few limited amount of fitness influencers who still post out fitness related content, but they do not do it for a commercialized purpose. They sort of do it out of passion. Or you could also say that the sort of good fitness content would anyways exist because there could also be other actors like those health magazines which put out fitness related content, and therefore you specifically do not need these sort of influencers to put out those content. So now moving on into the arguments that you could make for side proposition. One argument that you could talk about is about how this sort of creates unrealistic standards and puts pressure on the viewers. So the analysis under this argument that you could use is that you could say when there's a lot of fitness influencers popping up on these platforms, what happens is that these fitness influencers would want to stand out from the crowd of other fitness influencers in order for them to gain more views. You could use a few examples to supplement this claim. For example, when it comes to things like fitness influencers posting their gym pics, in most instances these are edited pictures taken after a good pump under good lighting. And in most extreme cases, what could also happen is that these fitness influencers could certainly use steroids but market themselves to their audience as a natural bodybuilder. So when this happens, what this sort of creates a warped image of what a naturally achievable body would look like to the viewers, and this can create unrealistic body standards. And the second thing that you could talk about is that in order to keep a large amount of viewer base hooked onto them, what these fitness influencers could do is they could tap into the insecurity of their viewers, telling them that if they're skinny or if they're obese, that is entirely their fault, and they can sort of possibly change their life if they buy these courses from these fitness influencers. So you could also supplement this claim by saying that there is an added incentive for them to do these sorts of things, because in a world where you have this where you have this increased quantity of fitness influencers, if they gain more views, they can sort of have brand deals with other fitness related brands, like for example Gymshark have sponsorship deals with them. So in order for them to do all of this, they need to show that they have a large amount of a viewer base, and you can say that this is the reason why they're most likely to engage in these sorts of bad practices. So a few impacts that you could talk underneath this argument is that one thing that you could talk about is that you could talk about how it affects the self-esteem of people, about how it creates body dysmorphia, because when you sort of pushed with these ideal body standards, you are most likely gonna feel bad about yourself if you can't achieve those standards, and because of that you can say this affects people's quality of life. And you can also additionally give more reasons as to why it's unlikely that the average person is going to achieve the sort of idealized body standards put forward by these fitness influencers. One reason you could give is that you could say, in order for you to at least achieve a certain level of those body standards, you need certain prerequisites. One, you might need things like gym memberships. You might need something like good diet. In certain instances, you might also need like supplements like protein powder and creatine. And you can say that in certain instances, this might be expensive for certain people, and because of this, certain people who can't afford this are at a disadvantage, and the effects. And the effects of the sort of like idealized body standards, the low self-esteem effects that I talked about previously, are gonna hit these people the worst. And you can also say that there can be also other people with certain disabilities. People might have things like eating disorders, people with things like high metabolism, bad genetics. When it comes to these sorts of people, it's going to be very tough for them to achieve the sort of like idealized body standards that are going to be put forward by these fitness influencers. And you can say this is going to affect them badly as well, because no matter how even if they keep on putting a lot of time and effort in these sorts of like endeavors, it's not gonna help. It's not going to be productive for them. So that is some sort of impact that you could talk about. Another impact that you could possibly talk about is that you could say that because you could say that in most instances what happens is that in order for the certain people who are going to willing to go to the extreme standards might resort to things like steroid usage in order for them to achieve these sorts of like body standards. And you can talk about how that is a bad thing as well. You can also say that steroid usage has been normalized by a large amount of these fitness influencers and whatnot, and you can like explain go in depth about those impacts as well. The second argument that you could make for side proposition could be an argument about how the sort of like quality of fitness related content is going to be reduced when there is this large influx of fitness influences. So underneath this argument, the analysis you use could be similar to the one used in the previous argument, where you tell that because of this large amount of fitness influencers existing, they need to stand out from the crowd to get more views, to get more sponsorship deals, and things of that sort. So because of that, you could say that one thing, these fitness influencers are incentivized to create content that is different from the sort of like well-researched and science-backed content that already exists. This could look like them creating bad workout plans with a large amount of exercises that are guaranteed to give you results, bad diet plans, and also them creating their own weird exercises, those unorthodox lifts which might lead to injuries. They might, even though these might not be good, they might simply create these sorts of plans just to create that sort of shock value so they can like stand out and gain more views. And the second thing that they could do is that they could sort of like oversimplify certain aspects about like fitness in order to sort of like gain a large amount of audience. You could say that this could be a bad thing because people are diverse, people have like different body types, different health conditions, and certain diet plans might not be suitable for everyone. Certain exercise, for example like deadlifts, might not be suitable for everyone else. And you can say because of this one size fits all content being put out, this can lead to detrimental effects to the people. So the impacts of this argument that you could talk about is that you could say that when a single influencer does these sorts of like creates this sort of like content, the other influencers, a lot of other influencers might also be incentivized to create similar content in order for them to stand out as well. And you can say that the problem that this creates is that it creates a race to the bottom, where a large amount of fitness related content is going to be marginally bad content on the internet. And you can say this is particularly harmful because people do not have a large amount of time in order for them to like keep on researching from a large amount of these fitness related to fitness influences. You can say people usually sort of like stick to a limited amount of like fitness influences, and because of this they're less likely to like look at other sort of influences as well. And you can say because of this this leads to a waste of like time and money for the people who are actually interested in like fitness as well, because even though they sort of like keep on putting in their time and effort in order to keep up with these workout plans, it's still not going to work for them because the content itself is not optimal. It's bad for them. So that could be an impact that you could talk about. And you could say the comparative on your side is like much better, because you could say in a world without fitness influences, what would happen is you would have these sorts of like YouTube channels or sort of like websites that websites of like health magazines that put out like science-based content. And you can say that is an exclusive benefit that you can only have on your site, because in a world where you have this like influx of fitness influencers, those sorts of content are most likely going to be drowned out. And that is an argument that you could make for side proposition. So now moving on into the arguments of side opposition. One argument that you could talk about is about how this increases accessibility to fitness, or like sort of lowers the barrier to entry to fitness for the average person. So under this argument, you could possibly use the analysis that before the rise of fitness influencers came about, the people who sort of like already consume the content of the few fitness influencers that already existed were people who are already invested into fitness. And you could say there was a barrier to entry for the people who wanted to get into fitness. The barrier to entry was the fact that there was not a lot of information available out there for these people. Because if you wanted to get like a good diet plan or a good workout plan that suits your needs, you would actually had to pay a trainer for you to like get those sorts of like information. But now, because of the rise of fitness influencers, because there is a large amount of fitness influencers on these platforms, what happens now is that these influencers want to attract more people to gain more views. So because of that, what happens is that one, these fitness influencers want to make fitness more accessible to a large percentage of the population. So this could look like them creating content based on like even different smaller niches of fitness. This could look like things like calisthenics, low effort home workout plans, your fitness plans based on different goals. And because of this, these people who otherwise wouldn't have been interested in fitness have a large amount of choices to choose from, things that are more accessible to them. And you can say because of this lowers the barrier to entry to fitness. And you can say even if most of this content could be oversimplified, that is still a good thing, because these people gain the barrier to entry is lowered, and these people gain access to this content that they otherwise wouldn't have. So even if the content is like oversimplified, that's all right, because in the future they can sort of, if they're actually that interested, they can sort of like research and get more valuable content from these sorts of influencers. Another level of analysis that you could talk about is how this rise in influencers creates a set of like more diverse influences coming to the front. You could say you could make the claim that because of this, there is a large amount of influences on this platform from like different cultures, different walks of life. And you could say this is particularly important because when it comes to things like your diet plans, they are the diet plan that is given by a sort of like an European influencer might not work for a person who's living in an Asian household. So you can say because there's a large amount of Asian influencers as well, they are able to like create sort of like meal plans or diet plans based on the sort of like your situation itself, based on the sort of your culture, sort of like meals meals that already exist within your culture. You can also say that there could be other people from different walks of life, like people who are like influencers who are like really old, influencers who are like students, influencers who sort of like juggle fitness together with their day-to-day tasks. They could look like a working adult as well who does fitness, who engages in like fitness goals in his part-time. And because of this, you can say you get a large amount of perspectives as well, which in turn can help you fulfill your fitness goals based on the effort that you can like sort of put in, and that is a good thing. You can also say that there is also a diverse set of influencers who put forward like different fitness goals. For example, these people could you could say that the sort of like claims that side proposition makes about like body dysmorphia increase could be sort of like counteracted by like certain positive influences who push you to engage in fitness to be fit enough to look healthy, and that is a good thing. And then the impact of this argument is such that more people are now able to access these sorts of like fitness based information, and that this reduces this lowers the barrier to entry for fitness. And because of this, people are able to like fulfill their own personal tailor-made fitness goals. So the second argument that you could talk about for side opposition is that you could say that there is going to be better research related to fitness on your side. You could say underneath this argument, the analysis that you could use is that In propositions counterfactual, the worth-like proposition is supposed to defend where there is no rise of fitness influences. There is only going to be a small amount of fitness influences with a large amount of following of people who are already interested in fitness. And you could say the problem with this is that even if these influencers put out bad advice, there is not a lot of people around them to like call them out, because there's only a few amount of influencers in their world as well. The followers are most likely going to put them on a pedestal as well. Because of that, you could say comparatively it is better on your side, because there's a large amount of like fitness influences. There's a large likelihood that these people would call out the bad influences as well. Why is that more likely? Because if these people are able to like call out other influences and stand out from the crowd itself, this would bring in more views for these sorts of influences. And you could say that this checking mechanism only uniquely exists on your side because of the large amount of like fitness influences that exist on your side. And you could say that this already exists. You could use examples of how there are already fitness influencers who sort of like critically analyze other fitness influencers videos, talk about why their plans are good, why their plans are bad, and things of that sort. And you could say that is a unique benefit that only exists on your side. And you could say that the degree of harm is like way worse on their side, because like I already told you, the few fitness influencers on their side are already put on a pedestal by their loyal follower base, and their loyal follower base is most likely gonna consume any sort of content even if it's bad. So because of that, the degree of harm is like way higher on their side. And you could also, on another level, you could also talk about why the comparative is better on your side, because on your side, because of this large amount of influences who have an incentive to stand out, you could say there could also be people like science-based influencers who sort of like base their entire content around like thoroughly researched information. And you could say this is much better because now people are most likely gonna get better information on your side. And because of these science-based influences, these bad influences are gonna be called out with proof as well, and that it's a good thing on your side. So those are the arguments that you could talk about for side, proposition, and opposition in this debate.